They say the desert keeps what it takes. It doesn't care if it's a man, a horse, or an entire tribe. But that morning, it gave me something back. The sun had barely cleared the rim of the western ridge when I left camp, and already the heat was gnawing at my skin like a living thing. The Red Mesa Desert didn't warm slowly. It went from cold enough to bite your bones to hot enough to strip the moisture from your lungs in less than an hour. I'd been walking since dawn, moving east toward the faint line of mountains that rose from the horizon, like a wall between worlds. The sand crunched under my moccasins, hot even in the early light. Every step released the dry smell of dust, sun-baked stone, and the faint, bitter scent of sagebrush. I kept my canteen slung tight against my hip, feeling the last of its weight. There was enough water for maybe 2 more days if I rationed it. Out here, water wasn't just life, it was time. The less you had, the closer you were to your end. I had been traveling alone for 6 days. The quiet didn't bother me. I'd grown up with it, the way the desert could be so still you could hear your own heartbeat. But it was a different kind of stillness now, heavier, like the land itself was holding its breath. That's when I saw him. At first I thought it was just another sun-bleached stump of mesquite, a dark lump at the edge of my vision. But as I drew closer, I saw a boot jutting out from behind it. Leather cracked, toes scuffed to bare hide. A man lay half-hidden in the sparse shade, his body slumped forward as if he'd collapsed mid-step. His shirt was torn, the fabric stiff, with sweat and dust. His skin was blistered, raw from sunburn, and his lips were cracked so badly I wondered how he'd even made it this far. He didn't move when I stopped over him. I could have walked on. Every drop of water I had left was already claimed by my own body's need. But something in me paused. Not something soft, not pity. Something older, sharper. A weight in my chest that felt like it had always been there. My grandmother used to call it the pull, the instinct that runs through the bloodline of the Redhawks. Sometimes it's a warning, sometimes it's a command. I didn't always listen to it, but when I did, it never lied. I crouched beside him, brushing my shadow over his face. His eyes flickered, then opened just a slit. They weren't the eyes of a dying man, not exactly. There was a strange, sharp awareness in them, as though some part of him was looking past me or through me, at something far beyond. "You're not from here," I said. My voice sounded too loud in the heat. His lips moved, but only a dry rasp came out. No words. I glanced at my canteen. I thought of the mountains ahead, the long stretch of empty land between here and there, the way my throat already ached with thirst. Then I thought of what my grandmother had said once: on a day just as hot as this, water is meant to be shared, but sometimes it's a test. I pulled the stopper and tilted the canteen to his mouth. The first drop slid past his lips, and he made a sound like a man waking from a nightmare. He drank in shallow, shuddering gulps, as though his body was afraid to take more than it could hold. When I pulled the canteen back, he coughed once, then sagged into the sand. For a moment, I thought he'd gone completely, his chest still, eyes half-lidded. Then he spoke. It wasn't the voice I expected. Not hoarse and broken from thirst, but deep, steady, and weighted with something that made my skin prickle. "You walked the path of the first daughter," he said. The words hit me harder than the heat. My grandmother had whispered those exact ones to me when I was 12 years old, the night before she died. I thought it was just an old saying, the kind elders give to children to make them feel important. But hearing it now, from a stranger in the middle of nowhere, was like being struck by lightning. The man's gaze didn't waver. "The sand is watching," he said slowly. "The rivers are closing, the stones remember." The cadence, the rhythm, it wasn't his. It was the council lodge's voice. The way the old men spoke when they were reciting history older than the bones of the tribe. "Who told you that?" I asked. My voice was tight, the heat no longer the only thing pressing down on me. He closed his eyes as though my question didn't matter. His breathing grew shallower, and his hand twitched toward the leather pouch at his side. It was worn smooth from years of use. I hesitated, then reached for it. The flap came open easily, revealing a small knife with a bone handle. The carvings along its side were in a pattern I recognized instantly. 3 lines, 2 circles, and a spiral. My grandmother had worn the same mark on a pendant around her neck. "Where did you get this?" I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, his hand shot out with surprising speed, gripping mine. His skin was hot as a forge, his fingers like iron. "Bound in blood," he whispered. "You cannot turn from this." I tried to pull back, but he reached for the knife and drew it lightly across my palm. A sting of pain bloomed, bright and sharp, and a single bead of blood welled up. Before I could speak, he sliced his own palm and pressed it against mine. The heat in my chest flared like a coal. In the Red Hawk stories, a blood oath wasn't just a promise. It was a binding. The kind that carried weight beyond this lifetime. If one broke it, the land itself would turn against them. The man's grip loosened, and his arm fell to the sand. His breathing slowed again, his eyes sliding shut. I sat there for a long moment, the sun burning the top of my head, my hand still tingling from where our blood had mixed. The desert was silent except for the faint hiss of wind moving over the dunes. I should have taken back my canteen, stood up, and kept walking toward the mountains, but my legs didn't want to move. Something had just shifted in the air, subtle but unmistakable, and I had the feeling that the desert wasn't going to let me leave this man behind. The man lay still for a long time after our palms parted, his breath shallow, almost silent. I watched his chest rise and fall in the shimmering heat, wondering if the next rise might be his last. Part of me thought it would be a mercy, whatever had driven him to this corner of the desert had already stripped him bare. But another part, the part that had sat through long winter nights listening to my grandmother's stories, knew this wasn't the end for him. I sat cross-legged in the sand, my canteen resting in my lap. The water inside felt heavier now, as though it understood it had already been shared and could not be taken back. After a while, the man stirred. His eyelids lifted just enough for me to see the strange sharpness in his gaze again. It was as though he were looking through me into some place I couldn't see. "You gave me water," he murmured. His voice was raw this time, more like a man who'd been breathing sand for a day too long. "You were dying," I said. He shook his head, slow and deliberate. "I was carrying." The words caught in the dry air between us. "Carrying what?" I asked. His lips moved, but the sound that came out was different now, lower, steadier, as if another voice had slipped in under his own. "You walk the path of the first daughter," he said again, and my chest tightened. "The sand is watching. The rivers are closing. The stones remember." I'd heard those exact lines once. Before, I was 12 years old, kneeling beside my grandmother's bed in the last hours before dawn. Her breath had been shallow then too, her skin cool and thin as paper. She'd gripped my wrist and whispered the words like they were a warning, though. At the time I thought they were only the fragments of a dream. Now hearing them from this man, the air around me seemed to change. The wind shifted direction, brushing across the back of my neck. "You need to tell me who taught you that," I said. He blinked slowly, and when he spoke again, it was as though his words were being pulled from somewhere deep inside him, like water from a well that had been sealed for centuries. "When the east wind carries the taste of iron, and the mountain cries, the first daughter will rise to carry the ember. The ember will burn until the rivers return, and the land will drink once more." The cadence was perfect, no hesitation, no searching for words. This wasn't something he was remembering. It was something he was repeating, something he'd been given to say. My throat felt dry in a way water couldn't fix. "And you think I'm this first daughter?" His eyes closed, and for a moment I thought he'd slipped away again. Then he breathed out slowly, the faintest shadow of a smile on his lips. "Not think. No." I glanced toward the horizon. The mountains looked closer now, but that could have been the heat's trick on my eyes. Between here and there was nothing but open ground and the unkind sun. I turned back to him. "Where are you from?" His head shifted against the sand. "Beyond the Red Canyon. north of the valley where the stone faces watch the sky. I knew the place, or at least I'd heard of it. My mother had called it a land of broken teeth, a stretch of rock formations jagged enough to shred a man's boots and will in a day. It was weeks away on foot. No one came out of there without a reason, and fewer came back at all. "What were you doing in the desert?" I asked. His breathing hitched, but he didn't open his eyes. "Carrying, for her, for you." "Her?" I pressed. He shook his head faintly, as if to say I was asking questions in the wrong order. "Water first," he said, "then words." I didn't like being told what to do, not by anyone, and especially not by a man who had nearly died in the dirt, before I found him. But something about the way he said it made me reach for my canteen again. I tilted it to his lips, and he drank as though each swallow cost him something. When he stopped, he licked his cracked lips and looked at me in a way that felt like he was measuring my weight, not in flesh and bone, but in spirit. "You carry your grandmother's eyes," he said. My skin prickled. "You knew her?" "I knew of her," he corrected. "And she knew this day would come. She told me so before I could walk." That made no sense. He was older than me by at least 20 years. My grandmother had died only a decade ago. I wanted to call him a liar, but the way he said it was too clean, too sure. "I don't believe you," I said flatly. "You will," he replied with a kind of quiet certainty that made my stomach twist. The sun climbed higher, pressing its heat into my shoulders and the crown of my head. My own thirst was gnawing now, but I didn't move. He shifted his hand toward the leather pouch again. This time, I didn't stop him. He fumbled inside, pulling out something wrapped in cloth. With a careful motion, he set it in the sand between us and unwrapped it. It was a coal, or at least it looked like one, small, blackened, no bigger than my thumb. But when the wind touched it, I saw a faint living glow deep inside, like the last ember at the heart of a dying fire. "This," he said, his voice a rasp again, "is the ember." The word made the air feel heavier. "It will die if I carry it any farther," he went on. "It's yours now. The ancestors chose you before you were born, chose you to carry it to the place where the sun first kissed the stone." I stared at the coal. The glow inside it pulsed faintly, almost like a heartbeat. I wanted to ask a dozen questions, but the look in his eyes stopped me. He wasn't giving me a choice. The desert was silent except for the faint whistle of wind through the dry sage. I reached out and closed the cloth over the ember, feeling its heat seep into my fingers even through the layers. "Why me?" I asked finally. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that wasn't for joy but for recognition. "Because no one else will survive the journey." The weight of that sentence settled into my chest, and that was when I heard it. Faint, far off, but real. The distant thump of hoofbeats. I looked toward the horizon. Nothing moved yet, but the man's expression had changed. "They're coming," he said quietly. The hoofbeats came slow at first, like the desert was still deciding whether they were real or just another sound carried from miles away. But I've spent my whole life in this land, and I know the difference between wind playing tricks and danger that's walking toward you. The man's eyes, sharp as flint despite the exhaustion, were fixed on the east. He didn't even try to stand. He just said it again, as if reminding me wasn't enough, as if the words themselves were the only thing keeping him alive. "When the east wind carries the taste of iron and the mountain cries, the first daughter will rise to carry the ember." He stopped there, but I could hear the rest of it in my head from what he'd said before. "The ember will burn until the rivers return, and the land will drink once more." "What happens if I don't?" I asked. The corners of his mouth tightened. "Then the land will die and the people with it. Not all at once. Piece by piece, until there's nothing left but bones in the sand." He said it without fear, like it was a truth so old that no amount of dread could change it. The hoofbeats were louder now, still distant, but the kind of distant that meant minutes, not hours. "Who are they?" I asked. His gaze shifted from the horizon to me. "They've been following me for 3 days. They'll kill to take the ember, but they won't know how to use it. The land will drink their blood before it drinks their water. I didn't know if that was a promise or a prophecy of its. So I glanced at my canteen, less than a third full, and at the cloth-wrapped ember between us. If they're after this, why give it to me? You can't even walk. I can't take it any farther, he said simply. My time was to bring it this far. Yours is to finish it. You're assuming I'm staying for this, I said. You were chosen before you were born, he replied. Whether you stay or not, the choice was made. The hoofbeats shifted slightly, spreading out. More than one rider, maybe 3, maybe more. That meant they were searching in formation. Can you stand? I asked him. His eyes didn't leave mine. No. It was a flat truth, not an excuse, and it left me with one clear decision: leave him and have a chance to outrun them, or try to help him and risk both our lives. The pull in my chest, that same weight that had stopped me in the first place, tightened. I shoved the ember into my pack. The heat bled through the leather immediately, but it didn't burn. Instead, it sat there like a heartbeat against my spine. I slung the man's arm over my shoulder and hauled him to his feet. His weight was dead heavy and he groaned, but his legs moved enough for us to start. We didn't head east, where the hoofbeats came from. I turned us south, toward a shallow wash I'd spotted earlier. A scar in the land carved by rainstorms decades ago, and left to dry into cracked clay. The heat slammed into us with every step. My breath grew shallow, my lips sticking together. The man didn't complain, didn't ask where we were going. He just kept moving, his eyes on the ground like he was reading it. After a few minutes, the hoofbeats faded slightly, masked by the folds of the wash, but the sound of the wind changed, carrying a sharp tang, metallic, bitter, iron. I didn't need him to tell me what it meant. The man stopped suddenly and squeezed my arm. It's begun. What has? He looked up at the sky. The east wind. The word sat in my mind like a weight. When the east wind carries the taste of iron and the mountain cries. I didn't ask what the mountain's cry would sound like. I had the feeling I'd know. We kept moving, ducking under a jut of rock that cast a thin line of shade. I lowered him to the ground and crouched beside him, scanning the lip of the wash. No riders. Yet no dust trails. But the wind was picking up, sending ripples across the sand like something alive. He leaned his head back against the rock and closed his eyes. There's a place ahead, he murmured. The old road. If you follow it, it'll take you to the canyon. What's at the canyon? The ember's heart, he said, the place where it wakes. I opened my mouth to ask more, but a sharp crack split the air. A rifle shot. The sound bounced off the wash walls, impossible to place exactly, but close enough that I could feel the echo in my teeth. Move, he said simply. We scrambled. Out of the wash, the sun blinding us as we crested the rise. My legs burned, my lungs clawed for air. But I didn't stop until the ground dipped again, this time into a narrow gully choked with sagebrush. Another shot rang out. This one hit the ground a few feet to our left, sending up a puff of sand. I didn't wait to see where the next one would land. I yanked him forward, half dragging him through the scrub. The thorns clawed at my arms, tearing. The skin in shallow lines, but the pain barely registered. We reached the far side of the gully and dropped into another stretch of shade under an overhanging ledge. My heart was hammering so hard I could barely hear over it. The man looked at me, his expression unreadable. You can still turn back, he said. Back to what? I snapped. A dry camp and an empty canteen? He didn't smile, but there was something in his eyes. Approval, maybe. Or acceptance. I leaned against the rock, forcing my breathing to slow. The hoofbeats were closer again now, moving in a slow circle. They were tracking us. I tightened my grip on the pack. The ember pulsed faintly against my spine. Whatever. The prophecy meant whatever the ember was. If the writers wanted it this badly, it wasn't just some old story. It was real. And it was mine now. The wind had shifted again. Less iron now, more dust. That meant they were closing in, cutting off roots, trying to pen us like cattle before the kill. The man, he'd still given me no name, leaned heavily on me as we picked our way through. The sage. His breath was shallow, but there was a steadiness to his eyes that told me he was already thinking ahead. "How many?" I whispered. "4," he said without hesitation. I didn't ask how he knew. Men like him didn't guess. We crested a low ridge and I spotted them. Specks at first, then shapes. 4 riders, their horses kicking up faint. Trails of dust as they fanned out. Wide-brimmed hats, long coats, rifles slung low. Their movement wasn't rushed. That was the worst part. They weren't chasing. They were hunting. "Keep low," I muttered, guiding us down the backside of the ridge. We dropped into a shallow ravine, the rock walls closing in. The air here was cooler, shadows stretching long across the sand. I eased him down behind a boulder and scanned the rim. No movement. I reached for my bow, the smooth curve of the wood, grounding me. My quiver was light, 7 arrows left, 2 with obsidian heads, the rest steel. "You can't fight them all," the man said quietly. "Not all at once," I replied. His gaze locked on mine. "If they get the ember, the prophecy ends here. Understand that?" I nodded. My fingers found the ember through the leather of my pack. The heat was stronger now, like it was reacting to the rider's presence. We waited. Minutes stretched like hours. Then, faintly, I heard it, the dull clop of hooves above us. One rider separating from the others, circling down. I signaled for the man to stay down. My heart was steady now, every muscle coiled tight. The rider appeared on the rim, tall, lean, with a weathered face and eyes that swept the ravine with practiced ease. He dismounted, rifle in hand, and began picking his way down toward us. He didn't see me. Not yet. I drew an arrow, nocked it, and waited. My breath slowed. The wind shifted again, carrying the faint scent of sweat and gunpowder. He stepped into the open. That was his mistake. I loosed. The arrow took him high in the shoulder, spinning him backward into the sand. His rifle clattered away. He shouted, sharp, guttural, a signal. The others would be coming now. I sprinted forward, grabbed the rifle, and ducked back behind the boulder. The man was watching me with that same unreadable expression. "Stay low," I told him. "If I'm not back in 2 minutes, you run." He almost smiled. "I can't run." "Then crawl," I snapped. "But keep the ember hidden." The sound of hoofbeats was pounding now, coming fast. I climbed halfway up the ravine wall and took cover behind a jut of stone. The rifle felt heavy, unfamiliar, but I'd fired one before, once. The first rider burst into view, dust trailing behind him. I aimed low, squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked like thunder, echoing off the walls. His horse reared, throwing him sideways into the dirt. The second rider was already dismounting, using his horse as cover. A bullet ricocheted off the stone near my head. I ducked, heart hammering. Below, the wounded man was crawling toward the man with the ember. I saw the flash of a knife in his hand. I didn't think. I slid down the wall, hit the sand hard, and drove my shoulder into him. The knife skittered away. He swung at me, catching my jaw, but I slammed the butt of the rifle into his temple. He went limp. The man with the ember hadn't moved. 1 minute left, he said, voice calm. The last rider's shadow fell over us before I heard him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his face hidden behind a scarf. His rifle was already leveled at me. "Hand it over," he said. My mind was a blur of options, none good. I could try to draw and fire, but he'd drop me before I got the shot off. Then the man with the ember spoke. Not in English, not in any tongue I'd ever heard. The words rolled like thunder, deep and ancient. The rider froze, just for a moment, but it was enough. I lunged forward, grabbed the barrel of his rifle, and shoved it aside as it fired. The shot went wide. I drove my knee into his gut, then cracked him across the jaw with the stock. He staggered, stumbled, and fell backward, into the sand. Silence. The wind carried only the rustle of sage and the distant call of a hawk. I turned to the man. "What did you just say to him?" "Words older than his bloodline," he said simply. "They make men hesitate. Sometimes that's all you need. I wanted to press him, but the other two riders would regroup soon. We couldn't stay here. I grabbed what I could, rifles, ammunition, a water skin, and helped him to his feet. The ember's heat was almost burning now, but still bearable. We headed south, leaving the bodies in the sand. Every step felt heavier, not from exhaustion, from the weight of what I'd just done. Blood had been spilled now, and there was no turning back. Night came fast in the canyon, the sun dropping behind the jagged horizon like it had been pulled under. The wind died with it, leaving a stillness so complete I could hear the ember pulsing in my pack. It wasn't a sound. It was a feeling. A low hum in the bones, steady and unshakable. We'd made camp in a shallow alcove carved by time and rain. I'd laid down sage branches to cover our tracks, but even as I worked, I knew the riders would find the trail eventually. The man sat cross-legged across from me, his back to the rock wall, the firelight sharpening the edges of his face. I still didn't know his name. That unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. "You're not going to tell me who you are you?" I asked. He didn't answer at first. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather pouch. He loosened the cord, poured its contents into his palm, a handful of dark seeds, no bigger than a fingernail. "Juniper," he said, "for strength." He tossed a few into his mouth, chewed slowly, then held some out to me. I took them, biting down. The bitterness spread instantly across my tongue, chased by a faint resin taste. "They'll keep you awake," he said. "You'll need that." I stared into the flames. "What happens if they catch us?" "They won't," he said simply. "But if they do, the ember dies with me." "That thing," I nodded toward my pack. "Is it worth all this? Worth dying for?" He leaned forward, his eyes catching the firelight. "You felt it. You know it's not just a thing. It's the heart of something much older than either of us, older than the land you stand on." I waited, sensing that for the first time since I'd met him, he was about to tell me something real. He began slowly, like each word had weight. "Before your people came, before the first stone was set in the first wall, the desert was one land. The tribes were not divided. They moved with the rivers, followed the herds, took only what the earth could give. And in the center of it all, in a canyon whose name is now lost, there was a fire. It had burned since the beginning. It was not made by man, it was gifted. Gifted by who?" He paused, chewing another seed. "The ones who shaped the first paths, the ancestors of the first dawn." I frowned. "You mean gods?" "No," he said sharply. "Older than gods. Gods are born from belief. The first dawn was before belief. It was truth." The fire popped, sending sparks up into the dark. "The ember you carry now is all that remains of that fire. It was meant to burn forever, but men grew greedy. Wars came. The tribes scattered. The fire was hidden, passed down through bloodlines, never staying in one place too long. My family kept it for 3 generations and until they came for it. The hunters, I guessed." He nodded once. "They are not just men, they are a lineage of takers. Every age has them. Different faces, same hunger. They take what is not theirs and bend it until it breaks. If they get the ember, they will not destroy it. They will make it serve them." I sat in silence for a long moment, staring into the flames. "You said there was a prophecy. What does it say exactly?" He looked at me as if weighing whether to tell me. "It says that when the ember flickers for the last time, the land will fracture beyond mending. Rivers will dry, winds will poison the sky, and the people will forget their own names, but if the ember is placed in the hands of one who walks neither for war nor for peace, the fire will return, and the land will heal." I blinked. "And you think that's me?" He didn't answer. "I'm not some chosen one," I said, shaking my head. "I'm a hunter. I've done things." "Exactly," he cut in. "You walk between, you kill to live, but you have spared those who would have killed you. The ancestors measure worth in balance, not purity. I didn't know how to respond to that. So I asked the safer question. Where are we taking it? He shifted slightly, like the question made him uncomfortable. South, beyond the white spine. I froze. You mean the salt range? That's 3 days if we move fast, he said. But we won't, because they'll be waiting there. My skin prickled. Then why? Because the fire must be placed where it was first gifted, and that place is across the white spine. The way he said it left no room for argument. For a while we just sat, listening to the faint whisper of the night wind. Then, far off, I heard it, the low, drawn-out call of a coyote. A single call, not repeated. We both looked toward the sound. They've found us, he said quietly. I was already on my feet, stamping out the fire. The canyon dropped into shadow as the last flame died. My heartbeat felt loud enough to give us away. How close? I asked. Close enough to smell the smoke. I slung my pack over my shoulder, the ember's heat warming my spine. Then we move. We slipped from the alcove, hugging the canyon wall. The moon was thin, just a sliver, casting the land in silver gray. Behind us, faint but growing, came the sound of hooves on stone. And for the first time, I felt the ember. In my pack throbbed faster, like it was aware of the chase. The night air was sharp, carrying the scent of juniper and dust. Every sound felt magnified. The scrape of my boots on stone, the soft rasp of my breath, the low thud of the scout's steps behind me. The hooves were still distant, but they were steady, rhythmic. Whoever rode them wasn't rushing. They didn't have to. They're tracking us by more than scent, the scout murmured. I didn't like the way he said that. Like there was something else in play, something he didn't want to name. We kept to the canyon's shadow, the moon our only guide. The rock walls rose high on either side, black shapes against the starlit sky. Somewhere above, an owl gave a single cry, then fell silent. Water crossing ahead, he said. It'll slow them down. We reached the edge of a narrow river, the water moving quicker than I expected. The moonlight made it look like a strip of black glass. It's deeper than it looks, he warned, and colder. Better cold than caught, I said, stepping. And the shock of it hit me instantly. Ice biting into my calves, then my thighs. My breath caught, but I pushed forward, keeping my pack high. The current tugged at my legs like it wanted to pull me under. Halfway across, I glanced back. The scout was following, his gaze fixed not on me, but on something further upriver. What is it? I called softly. He didn't answer. A second. Later I saw it. Just a flicker at first. A shadow on the water that wasn't cast by rock or tree. It moved against the current, smooth and deliberate, closing the distance. Go, he barked. I didn't argue. I stumbled the last few feet and hauled myself onto the bank. My boots squelched in the sand, but I didn't stop. I pulled the ember tighter against my back, feeling its heat radiate through the leather. The scout emerged seconds later, dripping and pale. He glanced upriver again, then grabbed my arm. They have help, he said quietly. The kind no man should have. The words sank into me like cold water. We ran. The canyon narrowed ahead, the walls twisting like the inside of a shell. My breathing grew ragged, but the sound of hooves was closer now, no longer distant but echoing down the stone corridor. They're pushing us, I realized. Hurting us. Yes, he said, which means they know where we're going. That thought hit harder than the cold. We reached a fork in the canyon, one path narrow and steep, the other wide and sloping. Without hesitation, he took the steep one. I followed, scrambling on hands and knees as loose gravel slid beneath. My thighs burned, my palms scraped raw. Halfway up, a stone skittered down past me, clattering against the canyon wall. I froze, glancing up in time to see a dark figure standing at the rim above us. It wasn't on horseback. It was just standing there. Even from that distance, I could tell it wasn't right. Too still, too tall. The moonlight caught its face, or where its face should have been, and there was nothing. just a smooth surface like polished stone. My stomach turned. The scout didn't look up. "Don't stop," he said sharply. "Don't look at it." I climbed faster, not daring to ask what it was. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound, but as I reached the top and pulled myself over, I felt something, like a thin wire of ice threading through my skull. For a second, my vision blurred and I saw fire. Not the embers fire, but a fire that filled the sky, burning the land to ash. Then it was gone. The scout was beside me, his breathing steady. "It touched you, didn't it?" I swallowed hard. "What was that?" "One of the watchers," he said grimly. "They are bound to the takers. They don't fight, but they see you, and when they see you, the takers see too." I glanced back, but the rim was empty now. We moved on, keeping low. My muscles ached, but the thought of those hooves and the thing without a face kept me going. After an hour, the canyon opened into a broad plateau. The land stretched under the moon, dotted with thornbrush and pale stone outcroppings. In the distance, I saw the jagged line of the white spine, the Salt Range, still days away. The scout crouched, scanning the horizon. "We'll camp in the shadow of those stones," he said, pointing to a cluster of boulders shaped like leaning towers. I didn't argue. My legs were lead, my hands stiff from the cold. We reached the stones and huddled in the shelter of their base. The wind had picked up, whispering through the cracks. I kept the ember close, its warmth soaking into me. But even as I closed my eyes, I could still feel it. The memory of that faceless figure staring down from the canyon rim, and the vision it had put in my head. A vision I was starting to fear wasn't just a trick. I didn't dream that night. I didn't have the luxury. Every time my eyes started to close, I would hear the hooves again, steady and unhurried, pacing me in my mind. When the wind pushed through the cracks in the stones, it made a sound like dry bones rubbing together. I pressed my back against the boulder, feeling the ember's warmth pulse faintly against my spine. The scout, Tahan, hadn't slept either. He sat cross-legged a few feet away, eyes half-lidded, lips moving silently. At first, I thought he was praying, but then I realized his hands were tracing patterns in the dirt. Circles inside circles, broken lines and sharp angles like jagged mountains. "What are you drawing?" I whispered. "Paths they cannot cross," he said without looking up. "They?" His hand froze for a moment, then moved again. "The takers, and the ones they bind to them," I swallowed. "The watchers. He didn't confirm it, but his silence said enough. When dawn bled into the horizon, the world turned pale gold. We set out before the sun fully broke over the white spine. The air was brittle with cold, and each breath made a thin mist. My legs still ached from the climb, but there was no time to nurse pain. We crossed the plateau, keeping low when hawks circled overhead. By mid-morning, the land began to slope downward toward a shallow basin choked with scrub. The ground there was softer, giving underfoot like it was hiding water deep below. "Stay on the rocks where you can," Tahan said. "This basin carries tracks like a gossip carries lies." We were halfway across when the sound came, at first faint, then swelling. Not just one horse, several. The hooves were sharper this time, the rhythm faster. "They've found us," Tahan said. "How?" He didn't answer. His eyes went to the sky. I followed his gaze, and my stomach dropped. High above, on the ridgeline we'd left hours ago, stood another watcher. The same faceless silhouette. It hadn't moved, but I could feel its gaze even across the distance, like a thread of ice pulling tight between us. Tayan's voice was like flint striking. "Run!" We tore across the basin. Behind us the hooves thundered closer. My boots slipped in the loose dirt, and every step felt like it stole more breath than I could spare. I clutched the ember under my arm, the leather pouch growing warmer, almost hot. A shadow passed over me. I looked up, just in time to see a rider breaking from the slope, spear in hand, the horse's mane snapping in the wind. He was close enough that I could see the red paint streaked across his face. "Tahan!" He didn't slow. Instead, he veered sharply toward a stand of thornbrush. I followed. ducking low as branches clawed at my clothes. We burst out the other side, only to find ourselves face to face with another rider blocking the path. His horse reared, and for a heartbeat I thought we were finished. Then the ember in my arm pulsed, hard, like a heartbeat slamming against my ribs. The heat burned through the leather, and the air around me rippled. The rider's spear wavered. His horse shrieked, not a neigh, but a sound like it had inhaled fire. It spun in place, eyes rolling white, foam flying from its mouth. The rider fought to control it, but the animal bolted, crashing through the thorn brush and vanishing into the basin. "What did you do?" I gasped. "I didn't," Tahan said, pulling me forward. "It did." We kept running until the basin dropped into a narrow ravine. Tahan slid down the loose rock, motioning for me to follow. Once inside, the walls rose high enough to swallow us in shadow. We paused, listening. The hoofbeats above slowed, then stopped. Voices carried faintly, too far to make out the words. Then silence. Tahan exhaled, his shoulders lowering. "They won't follow here. Not now." I touched the ember through the pouch. It was still warm, but not burning. "Why did it do that?" He hesitated. "It recognized a threat." "Recognized it," I repeated. "It is not a stone," he said. "It's a memory, older than the white spine, older than the tribes." I thought about the vision the Watcher had put in my head, the sky on fire, the land burning. "You've seen it before, haven't you?" "Whatever's inside this thing," his jaw tightened. "Once and only once, but that is a story for after we survive this crossing." The ravine narrowed until we had to walk single file. The rock here was damp, streaked with minerals that caught the light in strange ways, red, gold, and deep green, as if the earth's blood had been frozen mid-flow. At one bend, Tahan stopped so abruptly I nearly ran into him. "Listen," he said. At first, I heard nothing. Then, a faint, almost musical sound, not hoofbeats, not wind, a low, resonant hum that seemed to come from the stone itself. The ember in my pouch answered with a faint pulse. "This is one of the old places," Tahan said quietly. "The land remembers here, and sometimes it speaks back." He stepped forward and pressed his palm against the wall. I hesitated, then did the same. The stone was warm, and then I heard it, not with my ears, but somewhere deep, like a thought that wasn't mine. "Carry it." The voice was slow, weighty, ancient. I stumbled back, my breath catching. "Did you hear?" "Yes," he said. "But you heard it. Clearer. That means it has chosen you fully." Before I could ask what that meant, the sound of hooves returned, distant but unmistakable. They'd found a way down. Tahan's hand tightened on my arm. "No more running," he said. "Next time they come, we stand." The air in the ravine was thin and sharp, like it had never known rain. The walls loomed on either side, streaked, with ancient colors, ochre, green, rust red, bands of time pressed together for centuries. Somewhere far above, a hawk cried. The sound splintered into echoes. Tahan stood in front of me, spear in hand, his frame still despite the tension that hummed in him. "They will try to flush us out," he said, his voice low. "How many?" "Enough." The ember pulsed against my ribs, not in panic, but in something closer to anticipation. I didn't know whether to take comfort or fear from that. The first sound was a rolling cascade of stones, the riders finding their descent. I imagined their horses skidding and scrambling down the slope, the hunters leaning low, eyes fixed on the shadows below. Tahan's gaze shifted upward. "When they drop into the ravine, they'll come two at a time. The rest will wait above. Their mistake will be thinking this place is ours to defend." "And it isn't?" I asked. "It's not ours," he said. "It belongs to something older." The hooves came. Two riders broke the slope, skidding into the ravine's mouth. Their mounts' nostrils flared, hooves clanging against stone. Sunlight caught the red paint across their faces, lines meant for war. The lead rider spotted us and bared his teeth. "Give it here," he barked, voice bouncing off the walls. I didn't answer. My hand pressed harder to the ember. They came, fast, spears low. Tahan stepped forward, not away from them, but toward. He swung his spear in an upward arc, catching the first rider across the forearm. The man's grip faltered, his spear clattering to the ground. The second rider wheeled his horse sideways, trying to flank us, but the path narrowed too much. His mount's shoulder scraped stone, sending up sparks, and then the ember in my pouch burned like it had been dropped into fire. Heat flooded my chest, down my arms into my fingertips. The air shimmered. I raised my hand, instinct, nothing else, and the space between us seemed to bend. The lead rider's horse shrieked, eyes rolling white, and reared so violently that its rider tumbled, backward onto the stone. The second rider froze, his gaze locked on me. Not my face, my hand. "She carries it," he whispered, almost reverently, and in the next breath he turned and fled back toward the mouth of the ravine. The one who'd fallen groaned, reaching for his weapon. Tahan kicked it away, planting his spear tip at the man's throat. "Tell them what you saw," he said. "Tell them she's marked." The man's lips curled in a mix of fear and defiance, but he scrambled to his feet and stumbled after the other rider. Silence returned, but not peace. The hoofbeats above shifted, restless, uncertain. Tahan turned to me. "It's awake now. They know." My hand trembled as I pulled the ember from the pouch. It no longer looked like just a stone. Thin veins of light pulsed inside it, branching like roots, each beat matching my own. "What is it doing to me?" I asked. "It's not doing," he said. "It's remembering, through you." A shout rang from above, orders, sharp and urgent. The rest of the hunters were dismounting. They'd come on foot, slow and cautious. Tahan glanced up the ravine wall. "We can't wait for them to corner us. The old path is ahead, but it demands something." "What?" "Proof you belong." We ran deeper into the ravine. The walls closed in until we were brushing shoulders against them. The hum from earlier returned, deeper now, resonating in my bones. The ember warmed in my palm, guiding us to a crack in the stone barely wide enough to slip through. Beyond it was a narrow ledge overlooking a black drop. Wind howled up from below, carrying a dry, mineral scent. Across the gap, another ledge wound upward like a serpent. "This is the path?" I said. He nodded. "Jump or you don't pass." The hunters' shouts grew louder. I didn't think. I jumped. My boots hit the far ledge, knees buckling. But I caught myself. Tahan followed, landing with the quiet precision of someone who'd done it before. We climbed fast, our fingers finding holds in the stone like they'd been carved for us. The wind rose, tugging at my hair, trying to pry me loose. But the ember was steady, its heat holding me in place, almost pulling me upward. When we finally emerged, we were high above the basin, the hunters now just dark specks below. Tahan didn't stop moving. "We keep east. They won't follow us into the Red Maze before nightfall." The Red Maze. I'd heard the name once, in a fireside story meant to scare children into staying close to camp. A labyrinth of canyons where even the wind got lost, where the stones whispered in a language no living person spoke. And now we were heading straight for it. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the absence of sound, but the kind of silence that felt aware. Like something was listening, waiting for you to speak so it could remember your voice. The Red Maze was no place for the careless. Even Tahan's steps, usually light, seemed deliberate, each footfall placed like an offering. The canyons rose in jagged spires, their walls painted in streaks of rust and crimson so deep they looked wet. Shafts of sunlight pierced through. The narrow gaps overhead, slicing the path into bands of gold and shadow. "You've been here before," I whispered. He shook his head. "Once. Only to the edge. The elders say the deeper you go, the more the maze notices you." The ember warmed against my skin, and for the first time I didn't resist it. The heat felt like guidance, a hand pressing lightly at the small of my back. We walked for hours, the air changing as we went. The scent of dust thickened, tinged with something metallic. My throat dried faster than I could drink. The water skin on my hip was already half empty, and we hadn't yet reached the center. Then the first whisper came. It wasn't a sound exactly. It was a pressure in my ear, a pulse in the base of my skull. A word I didn't know, spoken in a tongue I shouldn't have understood. Yet I felt it. Tikan. I stopped walking. Did you hear that? Tahan glanced over his shoulder. Hear what? It said. I hesitated, the syllables tasting strange in my mouth. Tikan. He froze. Don't speak it again. Why? Because that's a name. The maze remembers. The heat from the ember spread into my chest, filling it like breath. I realized then, it wasn't just guiding us, it was marking me. We turned a corner, and the canyon opened into a basin so wide it seemed impossible after the narrow corridors. In the center stood a pillar of stone, its surface carved with spirals and lines that wound endlessly into each other. Tahan knelt, pressing his palm to the ground. This is the listening stone, he murmured. The scout must have passed here. It's where the words begin to cling. I stepped closer, my fingers brushing the carvings. They were warm, warmer than the air around them. And then the world tilted. The basin dissolved into a flood of images, not mine, not even Tahan's. Hands pounding grain under a red sky. Children chasing one another between lodges made of hides. Women singing over a newborn. The melody curling upward like smoke. Then, fire, arrows, the lodges collapsing. A single woman standing with a spear in her hands, her mouth moving, chanting. The same word again and again. When my vision cleared, I was on my knees. The ember burned so hot in my pouch I thought it would sear through the leather. Tahan's face was pale. What did you see? I swallowed. The day they fell, all of them. The ancestors. His voice was almost a whisper. We didn't linger. The sun slid lower, turning the maze's walls to blood and bronze. Shadows reached out like long fingers. As we moved deeper, the whispers grew louder, not in volume but in presence. They braided through my thoughts, pulling at memories that weren't mine. Words rose unbidden to my lips, fragments of something ancient. Water for the dying, fire for the living, stone for the unbroken. Tahan glanced at me. Those aren't your words. I know. At last we came to a split in the path. Two corridors, both identical in size, both swallowing the light. Tahan closed his eyes, tilting his head as if listening for some hidden signal. The right leads to the center, he said. The left. No one returns from the left. The ember throbbed once hard in my palm. Left. I met his eyes. It wants us to go there. Then it wants us dead. The whispers pressed harder, urgent now, their rhythm matching my heartbeat. I stepped toward the left passage. The air was cooler there, damp even, and it carried a faint smell of rain, a thing I hadn't tasted in months. Tahan cursed under his breath, but followed. If we don't make it out, I'm blaming you. Fair enough. The walls narrowed, until we had to turn sideways to pass. My shoulders scraped the stone. The whispers were constant now, not words but a weaving hum, like the sound of bees in a hive. And then we saw it. A chamber opened before us, perfectly round, the floor covered in a mosaic of white stones. In the center sat a pool of water, clear enough to see the pebbles at its bottom. I dropped to my knees and drank. It was the coldest, sweetest thing I'd ever tasted. But as the water touched my tongue, the hum in my head exploded into voices, hundreds of them, speaking in unison. The one who gave water will bear the fire will walk, and the stone will stand. When I looked up, Tahan was staring at me like he'd just seen lightning strike twice in the same place. It's you, he said. You're the reason the scout came back. And for the first time since this began, I believed him. The red maze didn't let us leave easily. Every turn felt unfamiliar, though Tahan swore we were retracing our path. The sun's angle shifted too quickly, as if the day itself was impatient for us to be gone. The whispers faded to a low murmur, no longer pressing but still following, like a river you could hear but never see. By the time we stumbled, Out into the open, the sky had turned the deep orange of a dying fire. My legs ached from the uneven stone. Tahan leaned heavily on his spear, breathing hard. But the strangest thing was the emptiness. The plain that had been alive with dust and movement when we'd entered the maze was now still. No riders. No black banners on the horizon. Even the wind seemed to have forgotten this place. Tahan's eyes narrowed. They should be here. The hunters? I asked. He nodded. If they lost our trail, they would have camped nearby, waiting, watching, but there's nothing. I scanned the distance, expecting to see a lone scout cresting a hill. Instead, I saw only the rolling red earth and a scattering of boulders. My skin prickled, not from heat, but from the sudden, oppressive quiet. We moved cautiously, heading toward a ridge where we'd have a better view. Every step felt too loud, our boots crunching on dry soil. When we reached the crest, we both froze. Below, the remains of a camp sprawled across the plain. But it wasn't abandoned in haste. It was ruined. Bedrolls shredded into strips. Tents collapsed, poles splintered. Weapons lay scattered, their blades bent and blackened, as if they'd been in a fire that left no ash. And the bodies, there were no arrows in them, no wounds that should have killed. Their faces were turned upward, mouths open as if mid-shout, eyes wide with something worse than fear, recognition. Tahan knelt by one, his fingers brushing the man's cheek. These are the same who hunted us. I swallowed. What happened? To them? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. A sound broke the silence then. Not wind, not bird, but a slow, deliberate thud. It came from beyond the far edge of the ruined camp, steady as a heartbeat. We moved toward it, the air growing heavier with each step. My hand drifted toward the ember in my pouch, though I didn't take it out. When we cleared the last tent, we saw it. A single stone pillar stood there, no taller than my chest, its surface freshly carved with spirals identical to those on the listening stone in the maze. Around its base lay the hunter's tracks, circling, overlapping, until they simply stopped. The thudding came from inside my head now, not the ground. It was the ember. I turned to Tahan, but his gaze was locked on the pillar. His lips moved, and for a moment I thought he was praying. Then I realized he was repeating the same, word over and over in a voice not his own. Tikan, Tikan, Tikan. The world narrowed, the camp and the ridge and the sky all shrinking until there was only that pillar, the spirals seeming to move under my gaze. My knees buckled, and the moment they touched earth, the voices returned in full force. The hunters are not the threat. The stone walks. The fire must follow. I gasped for air and blinked hard. Tahan was shaking me by the shoulders, his own eyes wide. You were gone, he said. For how long? Too long. The ember cooled suddenly, as if whatever it had wanted me to see was done. I stood, legs trembling, and looked once more at the camp. The hunters' bodies were still there, but something told me they wouldn't remain long. Not in the way corpses normally decay, but in the way things disappear when the world decides to rewrite them. We can't stay here, I said. Tahan agreed. But where we go next will matter more than anything we've done so far. We left the ridge behind, moving quickly now, the sun at our backs. My mind replayed the prophecy in a loop. The stone walks. The fire must follow. It wasn't until we stopped to rest that I realized what was bothering me. When I gave water to the dying scout, his voice had carried centuries-old words. Now, here in the open, with the hunters gone, I understood. Something I hadn't before. The ancestors hadn't just given me a task, they'd given me a deadline. We didn't speak for nearly an hour. The land ahead of us stretched wide and bare, offering no cover and no shade, only the endless red plain, broken by the occasional dark thorn bush clinging to life. The heat rippled across it like a living thing, distorting the horizon. Tahan's pace was relentless. He didn't glance back at the ruined camp. He didn't have to. We both felt it in our bones, the way the silence there had teeth. Finally, I asked, "What is Tikan?" His stride didn't slow. It's not a word we say, it's a name. Old. Older than the clans. My grandmother told me only once, and she spat after she spoke it. What does it mean? He looked at me then, the lines of his face sharper under the sun. It means the one who moves though it should not. I thought of the pillar in the camp, the spirals carved into its stone. The prophecy said the stone walks. Yes, Tehan said, and if it does, the ground remembers where it goes. Everything it passes through changes. A gust of wind swept dust across our path. It carried a low vibration, not unlike distant thunder, but there were no clouds in the sky. Tehan stopped, knelt, and pressed his ear to the earth. After a moment, his eyes opened wide. It's moving now. The hair on my arms rose. Which way? He pointed, not toward us, but toward the distant shadow of the mesa where my people lived. My stomach twisted. How far? I asked. Half a day, maybe less. If it wants to move faster, we cannot outrun it. A part of me wanted to demand that we turn back immediately, to run until our legs gave out. But the ember in my pouch pulsed against my hip. It didn't want me to run, it wanted me to follow. We need to get ahead of it, I said. Tehan's mouth pressed into a thin line. Then we go where the land is cruelest. It will pass there, and if the ancestors truly chose you, you will know what to do when it comes. We changed course, cutting diagonally toward a jagged spine of rocks that rose from the plain like the vertebrae of some buried giant. The sun dropped lower, and the heat bled into the kind of dry chill that could crack skin in minutes. By the time we reached the rocks, the vibration was stronger. I could feel it through my boots, a steady, deliberate rhythm like a heartbeat made of stone. We climbed to the top of the ridge and saw it. It was not a pillar now. It was a monolith taller than any man, its spirals glowing faintly in the fading light. And it was moving. Not sliding, not rolling, but stepping, its base lifting and settling into the earth without disturbing the dust. With each step, the ground darkened under it, as if the life was being pulled out of the soil. Tehan whispered, "It should not be awake." The ember in my pouch grew hot enough that I had to pull it out. Its glow was no longer red but white, like a coal just before it turns to ash. The monolith paused, turned, not in the way a man turns, but as if the land itself pivoted it. I knew then that it was aware of us. The voices came again, flooding my head. Fire follows stone, fire binds stone, fire dies, stone lives. I staggered, gripping the ridge for balance. They're saying it can't be destroyed, only contained. Tehan's eyes never left the monolith. And if we fail? The answer was already in my mind, not from the ancestors, but from something older, heavier, and colder than them. If you fail, it walks forever. Tehan didn't speak for several minutes. After the monolith turned away from us, its massive, soundless steps carried it onward across the plain, always in that same deliberate rhythm, never hurried, never stopping. The last of the daylight bled out of the horizon, and the first stars began to pierce the dark. That's when Tehan finally said, "There's only one place it can be stopped, and it's a place no living person should go." The ember in my palm throbbed, its heat rising until I had to wrap it in cloth. Where? He pointed southeast, toward a jagged canyon whose edges looked black even under starlight. The hollow scar. The old rite says if a walking stone passes through it, fire can hold it there, but... His voice trailed off. But what? It's not just the canyon. The rite requires two fires, one ahead of it, one behind. And both must be lit by the same hand. That means I have to be in front of it. I finished for him. Tehan didn't confirm or deny. He didn't have to. His silence said enough. We descended the ridge in silence. Every few steps I could feel the vibration again, like the land was breathing through my feet. My mind kept circling back to the ancestors' words. Fire follows stone. Fire binds stone. The ember felt heavier now, as if it were no longer just a fragment of something ancient, but a burden that would crush me if I faltered. We made camp. only long enough to drink from our canteens and chew dried venison. The wind was cold enough to bite the tips of my ears, but I welcomed it. It kept me from thinking too much about the path ahead. By midnight, the canyon was a jagged mouth in the earth below us, swallowing the moonlight. Its depths were hidden in darkness, but the air rising from it carried a strange scent, charcoal and wet clay. "This is where it'll pass?" I asked. Dahan crouched and examined the ground. "It's the only place narrow enough that the right might work. The ancestors chose this land well, but—" He hesitated. "We'll need to be faster than it." "How fast can it move?" "Faster than you want to know. The moment it senses the fires, it will try to break the path." I glanced at the ember. "Then we light them quickly." He shook his head. "It's not just lighting them. The fire must be born from the ember's flame, and the ember must be placed in each fire by your hand. The second fire cannot be lit until the first is strong enough to be seen from the canyon's far end." I stared at him. "That's a lot of time in front of it. That's why no one has ever done it." The night stretched on, long and sleepless. I sat near the canyon's edge, watching the faint glow on the horizon where the monolith's spirals lit the air. It was closer now. I could feel it in my ribs. Just before dawn, Tahan handed me a bundle of dry cedar branches and a pouch of resin. "This will help the fire catch faster. Don't waste it." I nodded, tucking them into my pack. My hands were shaking, but I didn't think it was from the cold anymore. As the first light of morning touched the canyon walls, the ground trembled. Not the gentle rhythm I'd felt before, but something heavier, more insistent. "It's coming," Tahan said. "If you're going to set the first fire, it must be now." I ran. The wind tore at my hair as I scrambled along the canyon's rim, searching for the right spot, a place where the fire's heat could drop into the path below. The vibration grew until I could hear it in my teeth. I found it, a flat outcrop directly above the narrowest bend in the canyon. I dropped the cedar branches, poured resin over them, and set the ember in the center. It didn't spark at first. I whispered a prayer, though I didn't know if it was to the ancestors or to the ember itself. The flame leapt to life. It wasn't like normal fire. It burned pale gold, almost white, and the heat it gave off was sharper, cleaner. It climbed the cedar branches with greedy speed. I turned and ran again, this time toward the far end of the canyon. Behind me, I heard it. Not the sound of footsteps, but the groan of stone shifting against stone, as if the earth itself were pulling something forward. The monolith had seen the fire. The canyon rim was narrow, the wind biting at my sides with every step. Each stride made the earth's tremor more violent beneath my boots. I didn't dare look back, not yet. The first fire's glow still flickered behind me, painting the sod rocks with that pale gold that wasn't quite daylight. I could feel it pulsing in my chest, each beat answering the thundering rhythm rising from the canyon floor. Then came the sound. Not footsteps, more like the grinding collapse of a cliff. Face over and over. The monolith was moving faster now. It wasn't just walking, it was charging. Tahan's warning rang in my ears. When it senses the fires, it will try to break the path. The rim narrowed even further, and I had to press my shoulder against the rock wall to keep my footing. My pack caught on a jagged edge, tearing the fabric. Cedar shavings spilled out, skittering into the canyon below. I cursed under my breath but didn't stop. The far bend of the canyon was still ahead, a dark knife cutting through the pale morning light. My legs burned, my lungs begged for air. But the second fire had to be lit before the monolith reached the first. If it passed unbound, there would be no second chance. A low, resonant hum filled the canyon. The spirals on its body must have been glowing again, bright enough to turn sound into something that could be felt. The hum rattled through my ribs, making every breath shaky. I stumbled on loose rock, nearly pitching over the edge. My hand shot out and caught a boulder just in time. When I steadied myself, I made the mistake of glancing back. It was there. The monolith's towering frame filled the canyon floor. Its spirals burned with lines of molten gold, each one flowing as if alive. And it was climbing, not walking, using its massive hands to grip the canyon walls. Chunks of stone broke free under its grip, falling like dark hail into the shadows below. It was closing the distance. The far bend came into view, but it wasn't just open rock. It was cluttered with boulders and twisted juniper roots. I'd have to clear a space for the fire. My hands were already raw from the cold and the climb, but I dropped to my knees and began shoving smaller rocks aside. The hum was louder now. The air itself seemed to thicken with it. My teeth hurt. My vision trembled. I yanked the last of the cedar branches from my pack, poured the remaining resin onto them, and set the ember in the center. My fingers were clumsy, almost numb, but the flame caught faster this time, as if it knew what was at stake. It surged, upward, licking at the sky. For a moment the canyon was a tunnel of light between the two fires. The gold from each flame seemed to reach for the other, weaving through the air like threads. The hum from the monolith turned into a grinding roar. Then came the shockwave. It wasn't wind. It was a force, a physical shove that knocked me backward. The monolith had reached the center of the canyon between the fires. Its spirals were flaring brighter than I'd ever seen, so bright they painted the canyon walls in molten gold. The ground beneath it began to sink, not collapse but draw downward in a slow spiral. The fires were pulling it into the hollow scar. I crawled toward the rim to see. The monolith was struggling now, planting its hands into the rock to try and climb out. But the spiral in the ground beneath it was mirrored by a spiral on its chest, one that was burning away like paper touched by flame. Tahan's voice carried over the wind from somewhere behind me. "Don't look away. You have to witness it. That's part of the binding." So I didn't. I locked my eyes on it as the golden spiral grew thinner and thinner, until finally it broke. The hum stopped. The monolith's limbs slackened, its spirals dimming to dull stone. The sinking slowed until it lay still, half buried in the canyon floor, unmoving. The fires on either end burned steady for a few more moments before winking out, not fading but vanishing, as if they had been erased from reality. The ember in my palm was cold now. The canyon was silent, not the kind of silence that follows a storm, but something older, deeper. It was the silence of a held breath that had lasted for centuries finally released. I stood there on the rim, the ember now nothing more than a smooth stone in my palm. It was warm, not hot, but in a way that felt alive. Tahan appeared at the far edge of the rim, his chest heaving, his braid loosened from the run. For the first time since I had met him, he wasn't looking at me. He was looking past me, toward the bound monolith. "It's done," I said, my voice raw. "It can't rise again." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he crouched and pressed his palm flat against the ground, his eyes shut. I could hear the faint scrape of his breath against the cold. And when he finally spoke, it wasn't his voice. It was deeper, older, layered, as if 100 voices spoke through him at once. "The fires are lit, the hollow is fed, but the path is not yet mended." My grip on the stone tightened. The words were not for me, but they sank into me anyway, heavy and sharp. Tahan opened his eyes. The strange voice was gone, replaced by his "Hun." "They're speaking through me," he said quietly. "They don't have long." I knelt beside him. "What do they want me to hear?" He turned toward me then, and for a moment I saw nothing of the man I'd been traveling with, only the weight of those who came before. "The drought will break, but the river will not flow unless you walk its bones." The words made no sense to me, yet they twisted something in my chest. The river. My people had been without one for years. Its dry bed nothing but cracked clay and wind. "They're saying the riverbed," I asked. Tahan's eyes unfocused. "You must walk from the first bend to the mouth, every step, every breath. Only then will the water return, it will know you." I swallowed hard. The riverbed was nearly 30 miles of sun-baked earth. I had just run the canyon, fought the monolith, and burned the fires. I had nothing left to give. But the ancestor's voice came again, softer this time, almost kind. You gave water to the dying. Now you will give your steps to the living. My throat closed. They meant the scout. The day I found him wasn't chance, it was the start. The stone in my hand began to crack, not break, but split along a perfect spiral. Inside, the surface shimmered faintly with liquid light. It wasn't gold like the monolith's markings. It was blue, pure like a mountain spring. I knew then. This was my guide. Tahan leaned closer, his voice low. When the stone grows cold, you stop. When it warms again, you walk. That's how the river will follow you. The canyon wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of rain. Not falling, but waiting. The ancestor's voice faded, leaving only my own heartbeat in my ears. The silence returned, but now it felt different. Not empty. Expectant. I stood, pocketing the spiral stone. My legs trembled, but they would hold. The river was waiting for my footsteps. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I could feel the weight of every person in my village, thirsty and watching the horizon. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of the walk. The first step hurt, not in the way a wound hurts, but in the way the body protests when it knows the road ahead will break it. The dry riverbed stretched before me like a scar, white and cracked, winding endlessly toward the horizon. Tahan stood at the bank, silent, watching me begin. He didn't follow. This wasn't his walk. He only said one thing before I left. Don't look back. The spiral stone rested in my palm. It pulsed with a faint warmth, guiding me forward. Each time it cooled, I stopped, breathed, and waited. Sometimes the pauses were minutes. Sometimes hours. Each time it warmed again, I walked. Day bled into night. Night bled into day. My feet blistered and bled. My lips split under the sun's teeth, but I kept moving. I thought of my people's empty wells. I thought of the elders' stories, how the river was once a living thing, not just water, but spirit. And I thought of the scout, dying under the shade of my waterskin, who had carried a voice older than himself back into the world. By the second day, the land began to change. The clay under my feet softened. Not enough to see water, but enough to feel its ghost in the earth. I began to hear sounds at night, whispers in the wind that weren't words, but still felt like a prayer being answered. On the fourth day, I reached the first bend. The stone grew so warm I almost dropped it. I sank to my knees, pressing my hand into the cracked earth. It crumbled differently now, damp, almost willing to give way. The sky darkened without warning. Clouds rolled in from nowhere, heavy and low. I kept walking, step after step, as the first drop of rain struck my cheek. It didn't pour right away. The ancestors were patient. They wanted to see if I would finish. By the sixth day, I reached the mouth of the river. The land there was wide and open, the cracked clay giving way to sand. I stood at the edge, heart hammering, waiting for the stone to cool. It didn't. Instead, it split apart completely in my hand, dissolving into blue light that flowed down my arm and into the ground. The earth shuddered, and then water. It burst from the mouth like it had been held prisoner for 100 years, rushing past me in a silver wave, racing back up the path I had walked. I turned and followed it, my tired legs breaking into a run as the river filled itself in reverse, bend by bend, until it vanished into the horizon where my people waited. When I finally returned to the village, the river was already there, wide, deep, alive. Children splashed in it. Elders stood at its edge with tears in their eyes. They asked me how I did it. I told them the truth. I didn't. The ancestors did. I just walked. That night, under a sky thick with stars, I sat by the riverbank alone. The water whispered against the stones, and for a moment, I thought I heard the scout's voice, again carried in the current. The water remembers those who walk for it.